is that the scientific community, based upon the evidence, 97% of climate scientists agree that climate change is happening and human caused.
The scientific consensus is that it's real. The debate is over what to do about it. You see the government, when you see NASA, when you see other institutions say that 97% of climate scientists agree, do you think they're making it up?
97% of scientists agree that climate change is fact. It's happening and it's man-made.
What the paper found was that in published climate papers that state a position on human-caused global warming, there's a 97% consensus that humans are causing global warming.
CNN has taken a very strong position on global warming that it is a consensus. Well, there is no consensus in science. Science isn't a vote. Science is about facts.
But look at the results of this survey of 11,944 papers in the scientific literature published between 1991 and 2011, a period of 21 years. They said that 97% agreed that humans are causing global warming. In fact, they say we are the cause. We would say, the only difference is we would say we are a cause. But we have 100% consensus. Now, what I want to do is to have a little closer look at this particular survey. I've nearly finished with you, so don't worry, you're doing very well. Isn't you doing well, ladies and gentlemen? She had no prior notice of this, and I think you've stood up very well under this onslaught. Now, on the slide that you see there now, you will see three separate definitions of consensus. The first one, that humans can be causing some warming, is the definition of consensus that all of us agree with. We have 100% consensus, they only have 97. Now, the next definition of consensus is that most of the recent global warming since roughly 1950 was caused by us. Now, on that, I suspect there would be much less unanimity in this room because we do not know what fraction of the warming since 1950 was caused by us. And yet, when Cook et al. Reported their results, they said that they had found a 97% consensus to the effect that most of the warming since 1950 was caused by us. That was their definition of consensus. It is the same as the IPCC's definition of consensus. It's the official definition of the climate consensus that we are responsible for most of the warming since 1950. Now, I'm not going to ask you your views on that because as good scientists, you don't have one. It might or might not be true. But let us therefore look at how they managed to present what is actually a 0.3% consensus in the reviewed literature on that question as a 97.1% consensus. The first thing is they eliminated 2/3 of all the papers they were looking at on the grounds that they hadn't expressed an opinion. Now, that is not normally how these surveys are done, but that's what they did. They knocked those out. Then they congregated together three levels of endorsement, only one of which was the majoritarian endorsement that most of the warming since 1950 was caused by us. They lumped that with the explicit or implicit endorsement of the consensus that we all agree with, that maybe we have contributed some warming and we don't know how much. They put all those together, and by conflating these two completely different definitions of consensus, they claimed there was this consensus of 97.1% that most of the warming since 1950 was caused by us. They said so in their paper, and they said so in a subsequent paper commenting on their paper. And it was only when my good friends David Leigate, Willie Soon, and Matt Briggs and I got together, did the math, and published a paper in Science and Education showing what the true figure was, that the truth began to emerge.
Severe weather relentlessly assaults the planet.
Record heat, record drought, record flooding. This is not a world we want to get into.
We have seen a global warming thus far of just a little bit less than 1 degree Celsius, and look at what's happened. Superstorm Sandy, Boulder, Colorado, all these fires, Hurricane Irene 1 year before, Sandy, how many billions was that? This huge drought, dust storms starting up in record volumes again, or bigger volumes again. The Pakistan flood that displaced 20 million people, the Russian drought and fires that led to the highest spike in food prices ever recorded.
I don't want to face my fears. I'm afraid of them. Goodbye, Patrick.
Goodbye, SpongeBob.
Extreme weather was more frequent in recent years. Is it a sign that global warming is gaining pace and exceeding predictions?
Now, has extreme weather been more frequent in recent years? The evidence is definitely to the contrary. The United States has always had extreme weather. We look back on our weather history, it's been punishing. Floods, droughts, tornadoes, hurricanes, great forest fires. Direct evidence of the footprint or the fingerprint of global warming, we're seeing more frequent, more intense, and longer-lasting heat waves. As far as hurricanes, tornadoes, forest fires, floods, and drought, the evidence is definitely not in. The consensus among almost all scientists is that it's a small fingerprint, not a large footprint.
Today, we dumped another 70 million tons of global warming pollution into the thin shell of atmosphere surrounding our planet as if it were an open sewer. And tomorrow we will dump a slightly larger amount, with the cumulative concentrations now trapping more and more heat from the sun. As a result, the Earth has a fever, and the fever is rising. The experts have told us it is not a passing affliction that will heal by itself.
But there is one relationship that is far more powerful than all the others, and it is this. When there is more carbon dioxide, the temperature gets warmer because it traps more heat from the sun inside.
There is no scientific proof that human emissions of carbon dioxide are the dominant cause of the minor warming of the Earth's atmosphere over the past 100 years. If there were such a proof, it would be written down for all to see. No actual proof, as it is understood in science, exists. When modern life evolved over 500 million years ago, please see the second exhibit, CO2 was more than 10 times higher than today, yet life flourished at that time. Then an ice age occurred 450 million years ago when CO2 was still 10 times higher than today. The fact that there was both higher temperatures and an ice age at a time when CO2 was 10 times higher than today fundamentally contradicts the certainty CO2 emissions are the main cause of climate change.
It was 1998 and the climate seemed set on a frightening trajectory.
What the world is experiencing could be part of a climate shift.
In a few years or a decade or so, we'll go into a permanent El Nino.
But the years that followed didn't live up to predictions, leading to a crisis of confidence.
They have been deliberately exaggerating the evidence, overstating the case, frightening people, frightening even children.
The globally average surface temperature hasn't increased in any significant way since 1998.
In fact, it can be argued since 2003 it has cooled off.
While the period from 1975 to 1998 had seen a rapid rise of global average air surface temperatures, in the years since, the rate of rise has slowed dramatically, leading a vocal minority to question predictions of catastrophe.
So we're getting this growing divergence between the observations and the climate model simulations.
You have at least to consider the possibility that the models are not reliable for one reason or another.
That's where I break with my colleagues. I just think there's a lot more uncertainty. We're now in the cool phase of the Pacific Decadal Oscillation. And I think that is the major thing that's causing the pause. And my understanding of the Pacific Decadal Oscillation is that we could stay in the cool phase for another 2 decades. So where does that leave us in terms of thinking that this sensitivity that we've deduced, largely based on this warming in the last quarter of the 20th century, during that period we were in the warm phase of the Pacific Decadal Oscillation?
And this is a thought which is, for about 30 years, people have tried to ignore because it takes away from the thought that most of the rise in temperature is due to increasing carbon dioxide in the atmosphere.
Well, you know, what's at risk if we did not take action truly is the survival of civilization as we know it. And that will sound like an extreme statement to many people, will sound like something that's hyped, but literally that is the case.
Scientists reported with unprecedented alarm that the North Polar ice cap is, in their words, falling off a cliff. One study estimated that it could be completely gone during summer in less than 22 years. Another new study to be presented by U.S. Navy researchers later this week warns it could happen in as little as 7 years. 7 years from now.
If they're wrong, catastrophe. Life as you know it on Earth ends. 7 degrees increase Fahrenheit, and we can't sustain crops, water, life under those circumstances.
But the debate is settled. Climate change is a fact. And when our children's children look us in the eye and ask if we did all we could to leave them a safer, more stable world with new sources of energy, I want us to be able to say, yes, we did.
This is the most serious of environmental problems. It's the one that we need to solve now.
What kind of place is this?
Back again with Lord Christopher Monckton, former advisor to the British Prime Minister, Margaret Thatcher, and climate change expert, and John Bolton, former U.S. ambassador and also Fox News contributor. Okay, Lord Monckton up at the blackboard. Boy, that's intimidating. Have I ever done that to you? That's not good. Yes, my lord.
Pay attention, Beck.
Yes.
5 points from Gryffindor for smiling in class.
All right, what do you have?
Right. Here is why there is no point, economically speaking, in doing anything to curb our carbon emissions, even if, as we now know, in fact, the UN is wrong. But let's pretend it's right.
Okay.
Here's why nothing will work. We burn 30 billion tons a year of CO2 worldwide. All right? 30 billion tons a year. Now, that is the equivalent of 2 parts per million per year in the atmosphere. So that's 15 billion tons per part per million, all right? Are you with us so far?
Not really, but I'll pretend, yes.
Good, right, that's very simple. 30 divided by 2, 15 billion, okay.
Got it.
With us so far. Now, the UN says we're going to increase the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere, unless we do anything about it, by 468 parts per million in the next century, 468 ppmv. So that means, if you multiply that by that, you get 7 trillion tons we're going to emit of CO2 if we don't do any mitigation over the next century. 7 trillion tons. Okay. Now, they say that those 7 trillion tons are going to cause 7 Fahrenheit of warming in the next century. That's wrong, but that's what they say. That means that in order to forestall 1 Fahrenheit degree of warming, you have to forego the emission of 1 trillion tons of CO2. Now, divide 1 trillion tons by the number of tons, the 30 billion tons per year that we started with, that we're burning at the moment worldwide, and how many years is it going to take before we have saved 1 Fahrenheit degree? Come along, Bolton.
Yeah, no, I won't be alive.
Neither of you can work this out. It's 33 years for 1 Fahrenheit degree. Now, 33 years means no automobiles anywhere on the planet, no electricity, no planes, no trains, no hospitals, no factories, no carbon emissions at all for 33 years, just for 1 Fahrenheit degree. That is why it is absolutely no point trying to mitigate carbon emissions. It makes not the slightest difference to the climate. End of lesson. Another audience experiment, because what I want to do is to see how many of you have, and you all read avidly on this subject, how many of you have read about various facts about the climate in the mainstream news media. And I'm going to ask 10 questions this time, and all you have to do is put up your hand if you have seen a reference to any of these in the mainstream news media. And we're not going to ask you to read them out each time. All you've got to do is stop me as I flick through them, and if you see a hand going up, don't stop me otherwise. All right. So here is the fact that since 1990, the global warming, as measured by just about all the methods of measurement, has risen at exactly half the central rate then predicted with what was said to be substantial confidence by the models. How many of you have seen that published anywhere? How many of you have seen it published anywhere that it might be for as long as 17 years and 10 months that there has been no global warming at all? Once again, 1 or 2 people only have seen that. Let's take number 3. How many of you have seen it in any mainstream news medium that sea level might actually have fallen in the 5 years shown on the graph there? No, I didn't get many hands on that one. Here is another one, that both the extent and the trend in global sea ice has shown very little change in the 35 years since the satellites were looking. How many of you have seen that reported anywhere? Just 1 hand, I think, perhaps 2. Here is another one, that hurricane activity over the last 5 years or so has been at its lowest in the entire satellite record. No, not many hands, though, a small number over there. I think mostly to do with Mr. Gray, who knows everything. Then, he's a lovely man, incidentally. Then, how many of you have seen it reported, a recent paper, that the fraction of the Earth under drought, the land area under drought, has been declining for 30 years? None at all on that one. And that windmills can kill big game birds. More of you have seen that one. We're beginning to get through on some of these points. And then that methane has been increasing its concentration, but at below the predictions of all the 4 previous IPCC reports. How many of you have seen that? No need for a cow fart tax. Only 1 or 2 have seen that reported. Number 9, how many of you have seen it reported that there is substantial evidence in the literature, and here is one of my favorite examples, Grinstead et al., sea level rise reconstructed over the past 1,000 years, put against the original IPCC representation of whether there was a medieval warm period and a little ice age. There's a relatively good match, which means at least there might be a causative connection. That certainly doesn't match with the hockey stick graph, which I won't want to say anything more about. So has any of you seen the possibility that the hockey stick graph might be wrong, and that the IPCC's original estimation that there was a medieval warm period, a little ice age, and temperatures today are not particularly much to write home about? How many of you have seen that in the mainstream news media? Hardly a hand, perhaps no hands.
No hands.
No hands. And finally, how many of you have seen it reported that the supposed 97.1% consensus that most of the warming since 1950 was caused by us is actually a 99.7% consensus that they have said no such thing? Not a single hand. Now, I did this for a reason. Diane, we must give you our warmest thanks and let you go back to your loving husband. You've been a real star. Thank you very much. I did this for a reason. I am angry. Democracy cannot work if the news media will not report any fact, however obviously true, however obviously interesting, if that fact happens to go against the Climate Communist Party line. The operation of democracy, as your founding fathers knew well, depends on the people being given the widest and the fairest choice of information. That was why you had, for instance, the Madison letters, the papers that were published in the journals of the day, so that people could follow the proceedings of the Constitutional Convention and get in touch with their representatives. They were given the facts on both sides of every debate. And that is how it should be now. But I'm going to call out the BBC, the Los Angeles Times, and all too many other news media now who refuse to publish any fact or any opinion contrary to their particular perceived opinion that climate change is dooming the planet.
Hey, Patrick, are you angry too?
Yeah.
What's the matter?
I can't see my forehead.
I think what we have to understand is that totalitarianism, which we had all hoped had gone once the Berlin Wall came down, hasn't in fact gone at all. Fascism, communism, socialism, call them what you want, all of these are forms of totalitarianism, which is the idea that the state should micromanage every aspect of our lives, our total lives, hence the word totalitarian. And this totalitarianism, which has always been something that the extreme left have believed in, you know, The Guardian and that sort of newspaper here in the UK, the Marxists generally, they believe in this. The fascists, if you want to call them that, that's the other word for them. These are people who believe that big corporations and big government should run our lives and that little ordinary voters should have no say at all except for the sake of democratic window dressing, just as they used to do in the old Soviet Union, where you used to get 98% turnouts and 99% voting for whoever it was the official Communist Party candidate. And that's what they're now trying to do yet again with the European Union, over which we have no democratic control at all, and also with the UN, which is gradually trying to copy the European Union in taking power away from the democratic nations of the West, little by little, by agreements and treaties every year about the climate, just as the EU did it about Europe. A little bit every year, so that it's like the frog in the boiling water. If you drop a frog in boiling water, it jumps out. If you put the frog in warm water and heat it up slowly, the frog eventually boils. And what they're doing to us is this slow approach, taking away our democracy by little and little, so that nobody notices until suddenly it's too late and the voters' power has gone. And that is what I'm trying to stop. From what I can see, there are two central mistakes which are being very craftily covered over by the very small number of scientists who are driving this scare. A lot of others drifting along with it. But these two mistakes are, first of all, that they're trying to pretend that the amount of warming that will result from putting extra CO2 in the atmosphere will be about 3 times what it will be. There will be some warming, but it really won't be very much. And the other mistake I think they're making is that they're trying to say that even if there were that amount of warming, it would somehow be cheaper to stop that warming from happening than to let it happen and simply adapt to it in a focused and sensible way. And in fact, all the economics literature, apart from a few government reports, all the peer-reviewed literature says it's about 20 to 100 times cheaper to do nothing and let it happen than to waste everybody's money now trying to make it go away. Right. The way the EU did it was to invent various purposes for itself, which it said could be better done at the regional level than at the national level. And not the least among these was the environment. It said the environment is the concern of all of us, and therefore this is a proper competence of the bureaucratic tyranny by Clark, which is what the EU has become, and they now absolutely control all British environmental policy. They say that we have to have cap and trade, for instance, which in America they were able to vote down. Canada has rejected it. But here, regardless of the views of the voters, regardless of the views of any political party, we are made to have this silly, very expensive cap and trade system, which is driving our working people's jobs overseas to places like China and India, where they pay no attention to this rubbish. And so what the UN is now trying to do is to copy the EU in gradually getting money and legislative power
into its own hands and away from all its member states, just as the EU has done. And let me show you how far it's gone in the EU. Now, more than 5 laws in 6 that are made for us in the UK, that we have to abide by, are made for us by the unelected commissars of the European tyranny behind closed doors, and we are merely told that we have to comply with them. Neither our Parliament nor the European Parliament has any say in this anymore. It is now entirely a formal dictatorship, and yet people are still fooled into thinking they've got a democracy because they can vote British governments in and out. It doesn't make any difference, of course, because 5/6 of our laws are not made by the governments they elect. They're made by people we don't elect, can't question, can't remove, can't replace, can't hold to account in any way. That's what the UN, with the help of EU advisors, is trying to set up on a global scale. So they'll be able to take money and power from all of us around the world.
It's over. You can get out now.
We conquered our fears!
We stopped crying!